Welcome to Alasquatch, the show all about Bigfoot in the great state of Alaska. I'm your host, Beans Baxter. So lace up your boots, zip up your coat, and come with me on an adventure as we explore all things cryptid in the last frontier. Hey everybody, happy holidays and welcome to what is the last episode of Alasquatch for the year 2020. We're going to get this year behind us, go on to bigger and better things. I know a lot of people seem to think that midnight on the 31st that everything's just going to go away and things might just go back to normal. I don't share their optimism. I think things are probably going to suck for the first few months of 2020, but I do think we're getting closer and closer to, I don't want to say the coronavirus going away, because I don't think it's ever going to go away. I think we're kind of stuck with it. But I think we're getting closer to and closer to never hearing about it again in the media. Let me just put it that way. And I know the vaccine is here. It's actually here in Alaska. I don't like to really do current events too much. I like to keep this show about Bigfoot, cryptid, stuff like that, but I kind of feel like, you know, there's just certain things you have to kind of touch on to just give perspective to the way things are going in the Bigfoot community and just in life in general. But I saw an article just yesterday that said a medical worker in Juneau, I guess was one of the first people to have an adverse reaction to the coronavirus vaccine. I guess it was a nurse that worked at the hospital there and had gotten the vaccine, and I guess she had an allergic reaction. She actually ended up hospitalized, but it sounds like she's doing okay. It sounds like she's going to pull through all right. I don't know. I wonder about stuff like that because, you know, they just kind of tell you, okay, you know, she had an adverse reaction. They treated her and, you know, hospitalized her and she's doing well, you know. And my first thought after I hear that she's going to be okay is, well, did the vaccine, is it going to work on her? Is it still in there? You know, like what, how does that work? I don't understand. So I'm curious. And I know, one of the local EMTs here in my hometown, just got the vaccine. He actually posted his inoculation, receiving the inoculation there. He posted it on Facebook. So it is here. It's in my tiny little town. So I imagine if it's here, it's probably just about everywhere by now, at least in America. And, you know, of course, being a first responder like I am, I actually have the opportunity to get it soon if I want it. And I think I'm going to hold off for just a little bit. You know, I've basically made it this far without contracting it, and I think I'm just going to kind of see what some of the reactions are to the vaccine before I go ahead and get it. You know, in my day-to-day work routine, you know, I'm constantly in contact with people whose, you know, self-care habits and their health are probably the least of their concerns. And they don't take very good care of themselves. And like I said, I haven't contracted it yet, at least not that I know of. I actually might have had it way earlier in the year in January when we went on our cruise. If you remember, I said everybody got kind of sick. And my wife and her sisters all did get pretty sick. Very, very similar symptoms to the coronavirus. And I actually had a little bit, I believe I had a little bit of a fever. I woke up a few times, you know, while everyone was sick. And it was probably, you know, we're on a cruise ship in the Bahamas. And, you know, it's 70, 80 degrees. I remember waking up a few times just kind of shivering cold. And I looking back on it now, I don't think I was actually cold. I think I might have had a fever. And then not too long after that, I did actually get a cold sore, fever blister on my lip. And I think that might have been a reaction to being sick. So I think I might have actually had it in January. My wife did get tested for the antibodies, and The results she got basically said, well, we don't see the antibodies, but that doesn't mean you haven't had it. It didn't make a whole lot of sense. So I don't really think, and I've said this several times before, especially like in my episode about conspiracies, the government isn't quite as in control as everyone thinks it is. The world's pretty rudderless. And people just like to have that feeling that, I'm not in control, but somebody is. The government's got this, and I'm kind of at their mercy. But it's actually a little bit scarier than that. Things are not under anybody's control, really, unless you believe in a higher power. So, anyway, I kind of wanted to talk about something kind of interesting. It's Christmas time. It's the holidays. I wanted to give everybody something to listen to and to check out while they're chilling out at home during the holidays. Maybe you're waiting for your ham to finish in the oven, or maybe you're wrapping presents and just want to put something on in the background. So I kind of wanted to talk about something that it's a pretty cool subject, something that's very fascinating, and that is incidents where people have been kidnapped by Bigfoot. There's actually a couple of fascinating stories out of Alaska that I'm going to touch on here today on that subject. And, you really can't talk about Bigfoot abductions without mentioning the Albert Ostman story. Now, granted, that did not take place in Alaska. That took place in Canada. But I feel like I have to mention it just because it's so ingrained in the subject of Bigfoot and Bigfoot abductions and kidnappings. You just have to bring it up. I'm not going to rehash the story. I think it's been done to death. Honestly, there's so many podcasts and retellings and videos about it. I'm just not going to go over the entire thing. I will give maybe a little Cliff Notes version of it, just in case there's anybody out there that hasn't heard it. If you're listening to this podcast, you've probably heard about it, probably multiple times. So just to get it out of the way, Albert Ostman, I believe he was a prospector. He was out looking for an area to prospect. He was out for, I'm not sure exactly the time frame. It was a long time. It was weeks, if not days. And he began to notice some things going on around his camp. His food was coming up missing. Things were coming up missing. His backpack would be moved or gone through. His supplies. And so he assumed that it was, I don't know why, but he assumed it was porcupines. I don't know why he didn't gravitate toward bears. Maybe he thought because it wasn't waking him up at night, it wasn't that big or something. I don't really know the reasoning. But anyway, he kind of tries to porcupine-proof his, that's hard to say, porcupine-proof his camp. And he wakes up one night and he's being carried along in his sleeping bag. Something's picked him up and is packing him around. And it ends up being a Bigfoot. They take him to this valley, this like canyon, this like box canyon, where the Bigfoots live. And there's like a mom Bigfoot and a dad Bigfoot, and then two younger sibling Bigfoots, a boy and a girl. And Mr. Ostman says he lived with them for, I think it was about 8 days or something. I could be off on my numbers there. I didn't actually research the Ostman account. I'm just spitting this out from memory. And anyway, he lives with them for a few days. He observes them. He makes some interesting statements in his story. He gives them some traits, I guess, that aren't commonly described with Bigfoot behavior. He says they would weave mats together to sleep on, which that's not something that you commonly hear. There is the nests that the Olympic Project found up in Washington, but those, I would think that he would have described those more, if they look like that, he would have said they were nests. But I think he specifically says they were woven like woven mats, and that's a little unusual for Bigfoot behavior. It's not something that's often prescribed or described in their habits. But then again, most people don't hang out with them for a week in a canyon. And anyway, he's there for a few days. They won't really let him leave. He ends up distracting the father, the male Bigfoot, with some snuff. He gives him the snuff, and the Bigfoot he like chokes and throws up. And if you've ever tried chewing tobacco and swallowed some, I think you could probably relate. God knows I've been there. And so Mr. Ostman is able to escape. He runs away, and he finds some loggers or somebody to take him back to civilization. Now, this Mr. Ostman's story gets bandied about quite a bit in Bigfoot lore. It's one of the accounts that the four horsemen of Sasquatchery, as it's called, investigated. And from what I understand, he never really deviated from the story. He kept it pretty consistent. I'm pretty skeptical of it. I'll go ahead and say that now. I'm not going to say it didn't happen, but I'm going to say I'm very skeptical of it for a few reasons. One, I kind of have a hard time believing that he had so much crap in his sleeping bag. But then again, I've never been an old-timey prospector, so I don't know. Maybe that's common practice to have all your crap in your sleeping bag with you. I do know when I was in the military and we were doing cold weather exercises, it was pretty common practice to put your clothes, to roll them up and put them in, like at the bottom of your sleeping bag, at the foot of your sleeping bag. That way when you got up the next day and got dressed, you weren't putting on frozen clothes. They weren't cold. They were warm from still being in your sleeping bag. But that being said, your space in your sleeping bag is limited, and that even with putting your clothes in there, it could be a pretty snug fit. Let alone room for rifle and food and boots and whatever else he had in there. I think he gave the story or the explanation that he put all that stuff in there to keep it away from the porcupines that he thought was raiding his camp. And I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it. It seems a little unbelievable to me, but I guess truth is stranger than fiction, so we'll probably never know. But that's kind of the go-to kidnapped by Bigfoot story. It's one of the most historical accounts, I guess, one of the most famous historical accounts in the subject. And getting into a more Alaska-centric story. This is a story that I've heard. I don't know how many times I've heard it since moving to Alaska. It's kind of a local Alaska, and local in Alaska covers a lot of ground. Local Alaska folktale. There's a lot of different versions of the story. It's almost kind of like the the two teenagers making out in the car, and the hook. They find the hook on the door handle. It's kind of that version of a Bigfoot story. It's just there's a lot of different versions of it. There's a lot of different takes on it. A lot of different the details change depending on the telling. So I'm not sure of its origins. I believe that it could possibly be based on something that actually happened, an actual event. But I think at this point in time, I think it's just been passed around. It's like the telephone game. It's been passed around so many times. I don't know that we'll ever be able to get down to the actual based on true event that happened. I just don't think that we'll ever get there. I'm going to tell the most common version of the tale, and then I'll give you some of the different variations that I've heard on it. And this is about the bush pilot whose wife was kidnapped by a hairy man. And this goes to tell, the tale starts off that a man who was a bush pilot, he made his living flying people into the bush for hunting, fishing, what have you. He got married, and him and his wife were flying to his cabin for their honeymoon, and he had to put down on a sandbar. I can't remember if he was having mechanical problems or was weather related. I want to say it was weather related. Again, that goes into there's a lot of different versions of this story. So he puts down on a sandbar, and they're waiting out the storm, and he wanders back to the sandbar. They kind of went back into the wood line a little bit to escape the weather, and he wanders back toward the sandbar to go to the plane and to check on it to make sure that it's, it hasn't been damaged by the weather. And while he's checking on the plane, he hears his new bride start screaming. So he runs back to where they were holed up. I believe they had a tent erected. And as he approaches the tent, he sees his new bride being carried off by a giant hairy man. And he grabs his rifle and he gives chase, but he can't keep up, and he loses the hairy man and his bride somewhere in the deep forest. He goes back. In different versions of the story, he calls for help on the radio, and some, he doesn't have a radio. He has to actually fly to a different location to get help. And he comes back, and him and a search party look for the bride and the hairy man, and they don't find him or find her. And so his wife was kidnapped by the hairy man, and he never sees her again. So that's kind of the most common version of that story you're going to hear. That's kind of the one that makes most of the rounds. And there's a couple of different variations on it. One of the most different ones that I've heard, and this version of the tale was actually told to me by a native, was that it's fairly similar. A gentleman marries, he's a bush pilot. He marries a woman. He takes her. He actually lives, in a remote cabin with its own airstrip, kind of out in the bush. And he takes her out there. She doesn't really want to live out there. She wants to live in the city, but he's a bush pilot. He's a bush guy. He likes living out in the bush. And I'm going to work bush a few more times into that sentence. And then, so they're living out there in the cabin, and she's not adjusting very well. Which is an actual thing. People actually get cabin fever here. It's a thing, especially if you're not used to living in the wilderness or in confined areas, or stuck in your cabin for 8 months out of the year when the weather's bad. So she's not handling it very well. He is concerned for her, but there's not much he can do about it. And he's a busy guy. It's hunting season. He's taking his plane out, and he's dropping hunters off and fishermen off, and he's working hard. And he notices his wife is kind of declining a little bit mentally. One day he comes home, and she's knitting this sweater, and he looks at it, and it's just huge. It's a giant sweater. It's huge. It's way too big for him. It's like a 6XL. And he asks her, he's like, well, what are you doing? Why is that so big? And she's like, oh, this is for my new boyfriend. And he thinks, okay, she's lost her mind. She's going crazy. And she starts telling him stories about her new boyfriend and how he's coming to see her, and how, she thinks he's awesome, and just he thinks she's talking crazy. And so anyway, he kind of decides, like, okay, I'm gonna have to do something about this. I'm gonna have to take her back to the city and get her some help. Maybe she can stay with her parents or something. But before he does that, he's got to make a few more trips to pick up some hunters he's left behind, or whatever. He leaves and continues to go to work, and then he comes back. There's not a really consistent timeline on the story. He comes back, I don't know if it's a few hours later or a few days later. I don't know. He comes back, and he sees, as he's circling the landing strip to getting ready to land, he sees his wife being carried out of the cabin by the hairy man. by the Bigfoot. And he carries her off into the woods, never to be seen again. So that was another version of the story of the bush pilot's wife that got kidnapped by Bigfoot. And that one was actually told to me by a nice native lady who I was talking to Bigfoot about one day. And that was an added touch about the giant sweater. That was a version I'd never heard before, and how she actually sounded like she had been interacting with the Bigfoot or the hairy man before she was taken, and almost like maybe she was a willing participant in going with the hairy man. So, like I said, different versions of the same story, which, could tend to poke holes in the veracity of the story. Or maybe it's just like the telephone game, where it's been passed around so many times that nobody's really sure what the truth is anymore. And like I said before, there's different versions of the story where they end up, they're not where they're supposed to be. They have to land on a sandbar because of inclement weather, and bride gets taken there. There's versions where they do make it to the cabin or wherever they're going, and the bride gets kidnapped there while the husband's away checking on the plane or working or doing whatever. But pretty much, I guess, in every version of the story that I've heard, the man, the groom, he's not around when the actual kidnapping takes place. He's always away from the tent or the cabin or wherever it happens, and then he comes back either just in time to see her carried away, or her screaming brings him back to see her being carried away. And that's it's an interesting take on the story. There's just so many different versions of that same story out there, and it just makes you wonder, did something like that happen? And it's kind of been twisted and details changed, like the telephone game. If you don't know, I keep saying the telephone game, but I haven't. If you don't know what the telephone game is, like when we were in school, the teacher would start in one corner of the classroom and she'd whisper something in somebody's ear, and then it would, that student would whisper it to the next student, to the next student, to the next student, and then they would, at the end, by the time it made it all the way across the room, the teacher would ask the last student, "What did you hear?" And it would never be what the teacher originally told the first student. I remember we played it one time. I can't remember what grade I was in, but I remember, she would start with the first student and say, "What did I tell you?" And the student would say, "Oh, you told me, the brown cow jumped over the moon." And I remember when we played it, the girl that sat behind me whispered it into my ear, and I could not understand what she said. And I just remember, it sounded like she said, "My peppers are hot." And I remember, because the teacher would pick random people and "Well, what did you hear? What did you hear?" And she picked me and she said, "What did you hear?" And I said, "I heard my peppers are hot." And everybody thought it was just so funny. But she had actually said something about the brown cow jumped over the moon or something like that. But that's the telephone game. Things get warped and changed, and people, they don't perceive what was originally told to them or what they originally heard. It changes over time. And that's kind of how I feel about the bush pilot's wife, that story. I just kind of feel like it's changed over time with different retellings, different details of the story has changed over the years, but it's still a really cool story. It's kind of some of the original Bigfoot, I guess, creepypasta out there. It's a good, scary Bigfoot story, and just kind of that archetypal, don't leave your women and children unprotected, or something will happen to them. And you see that a lot, and a lot of different, not just native legends, but just all kinds of folklore and legends where the monster or the creature or whatever it is, it's going to take your wives and your children. It's out to take your, it's out to take your livelihood. It's going to take your family away. So it's just that one of those stories where you have to kind of shake your head and just, I guess I'll be a little bit more careful when I'm out in the woods, but I don't really know what to do with it. So this next story, I want to touch on. It's this is actually, I'm going to give you the source here for it. You can find this at the deltadiscovery.com, and this is an article. It was published in July 18th, 2018. and it's called Captured by the Hairy Man. And I'm sure if you just Google Delta Discovery and Captured by the Hairy Man, I'm sure it'll come right up. It's a cool little article. There's actually a drawing that goes along with it. It's a pretty cool illustration. And interesting thing about this article, it's not credited to anyone. It just says by Delta Discovery staff. And this Delta Discovery, this is a newspaper that's published here in Alaska, and they publish hairy man stories in it occasionally, and it's pretty interesting, some of the stories that come through. But this is going along with our theme for the show today of Kidnapped by the Hairy Man. So I'm going to read this to you. I'm going to read it pretty much verbatim. So again, this is Captured by the Hairy Man, and there's no timeline on this. The article was published in 2018, but I get the feeling that this is like a historical tale. So this comes from Rampart, Alaska. Rampart's a little town. It's actually on the Yukon River, kind of in the interior. Just a few minutes of research I did prior to the show. It sounds like the population of Rampart right now is about 24. So it's a bustling little bush town. Here's one from Rampart. It is one of the strangest hairy man stories ever told. The story is also told by Norma Cobb in her book, Arctic Homestead. In the interior of Alaska, the hairy man is known as the Bushman. There was an elderly woman who was known as a medicine woman because of her experience as a young girl. She was out picking berries with others near Rampart when she was kidnapped by a Bushman. She was taken into the wilderness and brought into a cave where she saw other members of the hairy man's family or group. In that cave, there were both male and female hairy man people, and even young ones. They were hairy, wore no clothes, and smelled badly. But one of the babies of the hairy man people was very sick. Then she learned somehow that she had been taken and brought to the Bushman's cave to help take care of the sick baby. They spoke to her without talking. She learned the hairy man people thought a human would help make the baby well, and that was why they took her. After a time, the baby Bushman finally recovered, and after that they let her go because they thought she had helped make the baby get well. They also let her go as long as she didn't tell anybody where they lived. They then brought her back to her village. In Arctic Homesteader, the author adds that the Bushmen told the young girl they were afraid of showing themselves to humans because humans chase them and shoot at them. That's why they demanded she tell no one where they lived. So this one's not your typical kidnapped by Bigfoot or the hairy man story. This one's actually a little different. This is one of the few where you see the hairy man or Bigfoot reaching out to a human for assistance. Usually there's tales of Bigfoot's, maybe helping a human in distress or something like that. But in a lot of the stories I've heard, I can't really recall any where a Bigfoot asked for assistance from a human. And also, I thought something that was really fascinating in the story is the line, they spoke without talking. And, the first thing that pops into my mind when I hear that is, telepathy or, their mind speaking. But I mean, that line could be interpreted a lot of different ways. They could be pantomiming things to her or just acting things out or, there's just so many ways you can interpret that line. Although with the historical accounts of people saying that Bigfoot put thoughts in their head, I guess you could also interpret it as telepathy. And I'm not a big proponent of that. Not sure how I feel about that, but it's here. It's in this story. So I mean, we've got to deal with that line. They spoke without speaking. So I don't know what to make of it. It's a really cool story. It had a happy ending. The baby Bigfoot got better, and the woman got returned to her village. It makes you wonder what would have happened if the baby hadn't got better. Would she have been taken back to her village? Would they have blamed her for killing the baby? What would have happened? Again, that's you can find that story, and there's other hairy man stories on the deltadiscovery.com. Lots of cool Bigfoot information, Alaska Bigfoot information in there. So anyway, guys, we're coming up on that time. I hope you enjoyed this episode, this last episode of Alaskatch for Alaskatch. I've been talking too much. I'm starting to get loosey goosey in the tongue there, I guess. Hope you enjoyed this last episode of Alaskatch. God damn it, I did it again. Alaskatch for 2020. I really hope you guys continue to listen. Find us out there. Give us a like, a review. I'm really going to try and get behind the show in 2021. I'm going to start pushing it a little harder. I'm going to start promoting it. Got to get those listener numbers up. I want to reach a wider audience. I got some really cool stuff planned. More shows, better shows, more guests, more stuff out in the field, more videos. We're going to be doing a lot of stuff, but that's not next month is the official announcement of what's going on, and I'll just tell you guys to stay tuned because good stuff's coming. Also, I want to throw some promotions out there to some of my friends. Amy Boo has a new show on. I believe it's only on YouTube. It's Into the Wild Boo Yonder with Amy Boo. It's on the Beyond Explanation channel on YouTube. She's got I believe she just had one show. No, two. She's done two shows so far. Also, remember to check out Stephen Major's YouTube show, Bigfoot Today. You can find that on the Extreme Expeditions YouTube page. Also, Spokane Talks YouTube page. He's got, I believe, 3 or 4 shows in the bucket that are pretty good. And also, to toot my own horn a little bit, Alaskatch is now on iHeartRadio. You can find us over there. And also, just kind of a heads up, I'm having an issue with YouTube. I don't know what's going on. I cannot get the podcast on YouTube anymore. I'm going to have to figure out what's going on with that. Maybe I can get the episodes that have been missed put up on there. There's some kind of rift between Podbean and YouTube, and I cannot get it figured out. So I'm going to continue to work on that. Hopefully I get that squared away by next month. If not, I don't know. I might have to end up making a whole new YouTube channel. I don't know. But anyway, I hope everybody has a happy holiday, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, whatever it is that you celebrate. I hope you have a good one. Happy New Year as well. I will not see you till after the New Year or speak to you again till after the New Year. So everybody take care out there. Happy holidays, and remember to stay away from that Rona.